Good morning, garden friends. I'm standing here above the pond, and well, there have been a few developments. It's mud season, and I knew that the pond was going to be a bit wet come spring, but what I found the other day was not what I was expecting. It turned into a bit of a disaster, and after some scrambling, I think I've got things under control. But it is definitely going to completely change what I thought I was going to do with this pond garden. And so I want to show you what happened and what I've done so far to try to remedy the situation. When we built the pond, I built it in an area that I knew to be marshy and wet in the spring, and knew that it was mostly coming from this corner of the garden. This has always been a wet spot. We've seen water flowing out of here. So it made sense that we focused on creating a flow from this wet area into the pond, and then the pond could overflow underneath the road as it needed to. So I came out here a couple of days ago after we'd had some warm temperatures and some rain and all the snow melted and everything was open and I could see. And this entire area in front of me, in front of the camera, this whole area here was basically one big bog, one big swamp. And I found not just this spring flowing into the pond, but multiple springs along what's the north and the east wall of the barn. And what was happening, these streams of water were actually coming down to the pond and in a couple of places getting underneath the pond liner. What that did is send water underneath the pond liner, so much so that parts of the pond liner started bubbling up, rising up, and filling up with water. Obviously not a good thing. I think the center of the pond stayed down, the pond liner in the center stayed down, primarily because we still have the aerator, if I could see that, we still have the aerator going, and the aerator unit is actually pretty heavy. It sits on the bottom, and I think that was probably enough to pin the liner down to the bottom. But all around the edges, it was puffed up, like it was filled up with water. And the water in the pond, where water was getting in over the liner in certain spots, was the color of wheat coffee. It was pretty bad. The water has cleared up significantly since even yesterday, when it was still the color of, very milky coffee. At least now I can see the liner, as wrinkled as it is from being puffed up. But it's laying flat now and doesn't appear to be any water infiltrating underneath it to raise it up. So I'm happy with that. I'll take that as a win. So one of the first things I noticed when I came out to look at the pond was a large flow of water coming from this eastern wall. I could see it from above in the driveway, water flowing toward the pond. And when I went over there, you could immediately see what was happening. Let me show you. Let's take a little walk here, up and over the bridge. Oop. Hello, pond. So we'll go back here, down the step. This will be a path someday. And to here. Now, obviously, this is new. And this is what I had to do in a panic yesterday to try to get this water to stop flowing underneath the liner. If you come over to this east wall and you look down here in this opening, and I don't know if you can see it, but the water is actually bubbling out of this opening in the wall. And then it was flowing over the dirt to the pond and getting under the liner. And as you can see, I'm swinging this back here, it is extremely wet and mucky here. And this is actually an improvement. So what I had to do was dig a channel in the mud to the pond. I had to remove some of the rocks. And then thankfully I have chunks of pond liner left over. I was able to cut a single piece of pond liner, it was about 21 feet long, and put it into the trench. And obviously I had to make sure the trench was sloped downward. And then flopped it over the edge of the pond. It goes over the original pond liner here and then dumps into the pond. And now a significant portion of the flow out of this hole in the wall is now being directed to the pond. And if you look closely, you can see now the water is very clear coming in. And this is spring water. And you can see all the sediment that originally, when I disturbed everything, had settled out. But now there's this flow of nice, clean spring water going into the pond. So I solved that problem. But that wasn't the only flow coming in. Once I removed that flow from the equation, I noticed a couple of other things developing. So here's the new channel. And if you swing over here in this low area, I noticed that the water here wasn't going away. It wasn't being fed by the channel that I had just diverted. It was being fed elsewhere. And I noticed a couple of other little streams, very subtle, but still there, very subtle little streams through this area. And so I walked up to this wall and I found probably at least 3 spots where I believe it's coming in. There's a damp spot there, and you can see the rock is damp, but there's a little puddle there. And this is the north wall of the old barn foundation. There's a collection of damp, puddly spots right there in this area, you can see. And it's sort of seeping down here. And then over here, next to this step, there's actually a third one right there where I can see water flowing out of the rock. So once again, I had to get my muck boots on and get my shovel out, and I had to dig another trench. This new trench parallels the north wall, so it picks up all the water from whatever might be coming out of this wall here and comes down. And I did sort of a little like mini trench. Let's see if I can get it on camera. I don't think the camera's picking it up. There we go. Little mini trench. There's this little puddle here, and you can see the water flowing right there. And it goes into this main trench. And then this main trench continues, and right now I'm having it dump in between these 2 rocks into the bog area. I chose this route because it seemed to be the way the level of the land was going toward this rock. I didn't have time or the equipment really to regrade the entire area, so I just aimed it where it made sense. And so it's going into this bog area and obviously carrying sediment with it. And so the bog area, I just actually disturbed it again, the trench, to widen it in one spot. So the bog area is picking up some sediment here, but most of it seems to be settling out before it makes its way over the liner lining this channel here. I believe that new trench has alleviated most of the water that was pooling in this area. This wet spot has gone down significantly, and I don't see any streams of water traveling across the dirt to get to that low spot. I'm hopeful that when we come in to grade for the paths and for the garden beds, that we can kind of regrade things so that even if there is water seeping out of the trench, it can kind of be directed away from pooling here and the pond. So now I have two different sources of water coming in to the pond. The first one is this main one from the bog area, flowing down under the little bridge and into the pond. And then the second one is the new trench that I just dug. And that one has a pretty good amount, a surprising amount of water coming in. Let's see if I can focus in a little bit better. Surprising amount of water coming in to the pond there, which, focus back out, if we walk over here, means that the water has got to go somewhere. And if we walk over here to the big bridge and to the culvert, you can see that the water is overflowing and coming down the channel here into the culvert. And then across the road, it's dumping into the orchard, the old orchard. So the other bit of sad news, sad if you're a plants person like I am, is that I don't think my Japanese umbrella pine made it. I don't believe it's because of the cold or the snow. It is hardy in this zone. It should have done just fine. I think it just rotted or just got bogged out by all the water that is here. I built up a berm, a little bit of a berm when I planted it, of good soil and compost and some bark mulch. And I thought, it was set for the winter. But when I came out here in the middle of this disaster, I realized, I dug around the tree a little bit and I realized the soil is sopping wet. And conifers in general don't like that. And she's kind of the wrong color. So I'm pretty sure she's dead. And yes, I'm calling my Japanese umbrella pine she. Anyway, so I haven't lost 100% of hope. I'm about 90% there just based on her color. And I haven't seen any greening up of the buds yet, but we're still sort of in winter, fall, spring here in New England. So stranger things have happened. It's possible that she could perk up and suddenly her buds start, growing again. But I think it's done. So that leads me into my next discussion, which is, what do I do now? So now what? Well, my original plans for this garden were to do sort of a somewhat loosely Japanese-inspired garden with a couple of Japanese maples that would cascade over the edges of the pond, and a lot of conifers, some bog planting like native irises, but not a lot of flowers, more shrubs, and in particular different colored shrubs that would kind of knit together to create a tapestry of color throughout the year, depending on what their foliage was doing at different times of the year, and in particular in fall, hopefully give some nice fall color as well. I don't think that's going to be possible now. Most conifers and Japanese maples definitely do not like to be sopping wet. And I'm not going to spend all that money on beautiful plants only to have them die. So I think my plan has changed to be more of a wet garden, bog garden type plan. I still haven't worked out all the details, but definitely shrubs that are okay with being a bit wet, especially in the spring. Things like willows and dogwoods, even river birches. So there are plenty of shrubs and mainly non-flowering plants that like wet conditions. I just have to kind of rethink how I'm going to design with those now that I'm somewhat limited to that particular group of plants. The bog area is still going to be, I believe, native irises. I might sneak in a little patch of equisetum, which is another one of my bucket list plants to have, even though I know it can be somewhat invasive. But if I plant it in a contained area, I think I can control it. So that really hasn't changed. It's the rest of the garden plan that has changed dramatically. I don't think I can have my Japanese umbrella pine if it does survive here. It is another one of my bucket list items, bucket list plants. So I will get another one. If this one doesn't make it, I will get another one and plant that somewhere else in the garden. But this isn't the place for it. And yeah, and I don't think I'm going to have any Japanese maples here. There's one area to the east here, to the entranceway, that seems to be pretty dry. May consider putting some of those types of plants there, but we'll have to see how it shapes up. So for now, Japanese / conifer garden idea is out the window, and bog wet garden area plan is developing. So yeah, that's where we stand. In the meantime, there's still lots to do. And because it's still early spring and everything is wet, there's not a whole lot to do in the gardens. Shouldn't be standing on the soil much, especially up in the perennial gardens or in the vegetable garden. So I'm going to be moving rocks. And one of my first tasks will be to cut this liner to fit the channel better, and then start lining it with rocks and fitting it better to underneath the bridge, as well as getting this liner sort of sorted with rocks and trimmed up so that it kind of blends into the landscape a little better. What this new channel also does is provide me with another opportunity for a stone bridge similar to this little one to step over this little channel here. So I've got some stones picked out already, and I'll be creating another little bridge over there that will eventually, lead to and from a path that encircles the pond on both sides. Well, that's the latest news from the pond garden. Not an ideal situation and wasn't what I had planned, but it's not a complete disaster. I will regroup and change my plans, alter them to fit what is the reality of this space, and I'm sure it will still turn out to be something really beautiful. Thank you for watching. I hope you stay tuned to see how this space develops in the coming months. And yeah, I will see you in the next video. Bye.